Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pure Kino podcast. I'm your host, Kino, and I am so honored to be joined again by a man I look up to so much with his work. I've been following him for years. He's been a guest on this podcast before, John Graham. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me on again. I appreciate it.
No, it was awesome. I think like that first episode or the first podcast that we did together, everyone was like, "Oh my god, I love John Graham! How is Kino talking to him right now?" Because it just seemed
Yeah.
like our worlds were kind of not, you got video game stuff mostly over here, and then Soprano stuff mostly over here. But people were like, "Oh my god, that's so incredible!" So I think people enjoyed hearing us talking about it. We're both huge fans of the series. And the reason you wanted to come on this time is because you're also a huge fan of Breaking Bad, which I happen to be right in the middle of reviewing. I'm working on the final episode right now, Felina. I just watched that today, and I'm in the process of writing the script. So perfect timing for us to discuss the series. What was your kind of what did you first think of it when you started watching?
I think I started watching when like season 3 was airing or about to air. Like it took me a while to like learn about it. And that was the case for a lot of people, I think. It was kind of under the radar. Um but as soon as like watched the first episode, I was hooked. Like I couldn't believe how effective the storytelling was, and it inspired me in my own productions. Like that episodic storytelling where every scene is very carefully constructed and knows exactly what its reveal is, and you don't necessarily, usually the reveal of what why the scene is there isn't revealed until like the very last shot. And I just admired how skillfully that was done. It's rare to see that kind of discipline in the writing from a show, and right away that was obvious, and I was hooked. And I was just like, I want to like, I don't want to copy Breaking Bad in my own show, but this show is doing something in terms of like compelling its audience that I wanted to replicate.
I really see the influences of Breaking Bad, especially like season 5 of Arby and the Chief. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, John has a very long running series of live action slash machinima, mostly focused around the Halo franchise. And season 5 in particular, I saw a lot of that episodic storytelling, but also, like you said, each episode had a central idea that it all kind of pivoted around. And again, like you said, you might not know what the title or what the central thing of it is until the very end. And even though it's all episodic and it's telling a long story, each episode has a really like a contained narrative like function almost that I really saw the influences of Breaking Bad in that season.
Yeah, totally. And I was so impressed with it. It wasn't the only show that influenced me. Sopranos obviously was another one. Dexter was another one.
Hmm.
That it had this momentum and it built up to a very strong finale most of the
Yeah.
time. Not every season of Dexter is
Yeah.
great, but there are some really good ones.
Yeah.
And I was just like, God, there's something to this episodic method of storytelling that I really like. And not to like belittle my older work that was all like just
Yeah.
self-contained, very gag
Yeah. Yeah.
focused silly episodes. I was quite happy to make those, and I'm
Yeah.
still fond of my work. But I wanted to do something new. I wanted to challenge myself, and I wanted to see if I could make something as compelling as Breaking Bad with something like action figures, right? And if I could pull it off, then I could prove to everybody watching that,
Yeah.
hey, you don't need a big budget, you don't need an extravagant cast and production design. Those things are
Okay.
great if you
Yeah.
have them, but
Mhm.
all it really takes is quality in the writing and
Yeah.
imagination, and you can make something really cool.
I think that quality really shows, especially in the sense that like, you know, again, Breaking Bad's story is told over the long term, right? Of like each action is leading into the next action. But like I said, even within each episode, there's such a strong attention to like emotional details and like the consequences of it. It's not just that like Walt's cooking meth, right? It's that his pride and his ego and all this kind of stuff are influencing his actions, and there's ramifications all around him. And I do think I see that a lot with your show too, where it's like it's not just the plot that's happening, it's it's the character's own internal problems, their desires, all that kind of stuff that's pushing them towards the big kind of external conflicts that they find themselves in each season.
Right. The characters are not only at war with external elements, but
Yeah,
at war with themselves. That was
yeah.
something that really stuck with me, and I wanted that to be integral to my own storytelling for
Yeah,
sure.
Breaking Bad was, again, like, I think you said you started around the third season. Like you said, it was one of those shows that it took a little while for audiences to catch on. Part of that, I think, was just because AMC was not a really well known network before Breaking Bad. I think they had maybe had a couple of things. They're mostly known for just showing movies.
Yeah.
But that show, and then I think maybe during the same time was when Mad Men started, around that time, maybe like towards the end of Breaking Bad. But man, for a while they were really known as like basically HBO tier in terms of like just putting out hits and hits, like The Walking Dead, all that kind of stuff. So, and then again, Breaking Bad was really a show that catapulted them to fame.
It's interesting looking at the view figures because it's like an upward curve like this. Whereas if you look at Better Call Saul's, it kind of starts high and goes low.
Yeah.
It's like the inverse of that. I thought that was interesting.
It's also interesting that if you follow like Vince Gilligan, like behind the scenes interviews and kind of stuff like that, he fully admits that like a lot of this kind of stuff was an accident in storytelling. Like his original vision for where he was going to go was a much more kind of simple action packed show versus the very kind of nuanced character show it became. And it's, again, it's a testament to like stories don't always go the way you originally thought. And I'm sure you've had that same experience with Arby and the Chief, right? That you thought it starting out it was going to be this like very simple comedy thing, but by treating the characters with respect and treating your audience with respect, you found a way to dig into these like nuggets of like, again, emotional conflict that you wouldn't expect in from the very first season of Arby and the Chief.
Yeah. Oh, the shift in my show, I think, was interpreted by a lot of people at the time as it jumping the shark. And I can understand that, but I never saw it that way because at its core, whether it's the early seasons or the later seasons, I always saw it as an exploration of like good and evil
Yeah.
fundamentally. Like where the toys encounter these people online
Mm-hmm.
and they're behaving in these ways that are appalling, but ways that they wouldn't behave in real life. They are
Yeah.
behaving the way they do specifically because they are online, anonymous,
Yeah.
not face to face with the people they're conversing with. And so they feel liberated to say sometimes awful things and behave in awful ways. And that fascinated me. And with each season that I did, it was just a deeper exploration of that phenomenon. Right.
Yeah. Well, even like from the very like second season, the wedding episode, quintessentially one of the funniest episodes of the show. But the thing that they kind of talk about, which was like this kind of taking the online culture too far, like getting too immersed in like the digital space, like that's aged like fine wine. It's only gotten like 100 times worse since that episode came out, and the way people treat online interactions. So I think you're way ahead of your time with a lot of the stuff you were talking about.
I think so too. Yeah, there's a lot of real life stuff that's like catching up with us now that
Yeah.
like tossers for instance where you let online users police one another
Hmm.
like like online watchdog sort of thing. I mean, I saw all that coming. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
even a joke to me at the time. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
this is going to happen eventually, you know.
And again, the political side of it, all that kind of stuff, and how that's immersed into you know online gaming. It's crazy to think about like the early days of gaming, where it was like it was all carefree, like it was an escape from the real world, and now a lot of that kind of real world stuff has found itself into here, where people were always arguing politics and stuff like that, but it seems like it's gotten much much worse in today's climate. That like everything nothing can be apolitical, everything's got to be about politics, the culture war. Even shows like Breaking Bad, you'll have people who are arguing on Twitter. They're like, oh, if you like this show, it's because you're a misogynist or blah blah blah, you hate Skylar for this blah blah blah. And it's really annoying to be a part of that when you're just trying to be a fan of a great piece of art like your show or like Breaking Bad.
Yeah. I can't stand that where it's like you like a certain person or a certain thing and you're immediately thrown into one camp or another. There's a
Hmm.
lot of that going on. That bugs the
Yeah.
shit out of me. And it's funny, like, because we're talking about Breaking Bad, which is neo western, and I don't know if it's obvious to people. It's probably obvious to you, but I shoot Arby and the Chief like it's a western, and a lot of people talk about the internet in its infancy as like a wild west of
Yeah.
sorts, right? So I always thought that was so cool to like,
Yeah.
well, what if I just shot it like a western, like treating the
Yeah.
internet like the internet is a wild west of sorts.
Yeah.
I'll just shoot it like that, and it's
Yeah.
sort of like a neo western
Yeah.
almost, you know,
I
a lot of
didn't.
like sky shots and like
Yeah.
cowboy shots, people framed in like that
Yeah. I
iconic
never
sort of
thought
way.
about that for your series, but yeah, I could really see that. And I also thought I could see a lot of like maybe film noir influences on like especially a lot of the internal shots when they're in like spaceships and the way you use like light. Like to me, one of the defining things of film noir is the way they use shadows and light to really create this effect. And I noticed that a lot with a lot of the again the machinima side of it, but also the live action too. A lot of very sharp shadows that usually hint at like the conflict that the characters are feeling.
Yeah. Well, with doing movies with Halo, there's not much I can do to, I mean, nothing really that I can do to manipulate the lighting in like the
Yeah,
stages that the events take place in, the gameplay takes place in. So I kind of have to work around what
yeah,
already exists, exactly how it is. But I work around that to make it work. Like you can load up Forge mode in Halo, and you can
yeah.
place lights to a degree, so I can add a little bit of color if I need to. But for the most part, I just try and work around how the levels are already constructed, and I do try to achieve certain things in terms of lighting, and sometimes color temperature will make things warmer or colder in post production. And
So I
I've
thought you just turned on all the filters in Forge mode like all at once because that's
yeah,
that's the most awesome sick way to play the game.
I have done that a few times. Yeah,
Yeah,
as like a gag. Yeah, but yeah,
I
sometimes I
love
play
that
around with
episode.
sometimes I play around with one or two of the filters in
Yeah,
earnest, like to achieve a certain effect. But yeah,
I got you.
yeah,
Oh god, it was so funny. Chiefs, the map that he made with all the effects turned on and all the
yeah.
cars and stuff stacked in there. My god, I we're laughing about old episodes that you've done that are like again are still like so funny to me. Like again, and I think that kind of humor that relating it back to Breaking Bad, which is the thing we really want to talk about this episode. Breaking Bad had a lot of this kind of like deadpan style humor where it wasn't necessarily that funny things were happening all the time, but a lot of times characters' reactions to things and how inappropriate it was what was funny. You know, Walt, would have his kind of moments, Jesse would have his moments, and I saw a lot of that with Chief too in your show. That again, it's by itself it might not be funny, but just the fact that like how Chief like thinks is like it's just so ridiculous and off kilter that you're like you're just laughing at the absurdity of it all.
Yeah. And I think the show ages fairly well because a lot of the jokes are not specific to that moment in time,
Hmm.
but they are attacking or satirizing core human behaviors that are timeless.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is exaggerated, reflected in Chief, Arbiter as well, but Chief to like a ridiculous degree,
I
right?
gotcha. I wanted to ask you about Breaking Bad. Like, what did you think about the finale? Because that's the one I'm on right now. And I do a podcast with this guy Macabre Storytelling. He's my co-host, and he's kind of criticized the ending for being a little bit too happy and too like um satisfactory for Walt. He felt like the show was really building up to like breaking Walt down. So the fact that he ends it on this very kind of triumphant note left kind of a sour taste in his mouth. And that made me think because before that I had thought the ending was perfect. I was like, this is one of the greatest endings in all time, like how great it was. But looking back, I do wonder was it a little bit too happy for Walt? Did he deserve a little bit less than what he got? Because he basically got all that he wanted. His money's going to his kids. He's avenged Hank's death. You know, he got to say goodbye to everyone. What are your thoughts on the finale?
Well, from what I've heard of like behind the scenes stuff, like Vince Gilligan and his team, they were aiming for a satisfying ending, which
Yeah,
I respect. I mean, that's totally understandable. Um, I do wonder if 'cause one of the things I've always admired about Breaking Bad is its fine balance between schematic and organic storytelling. Organic being that you follow each of the characters moment to moment. It's like, what are they thinking now? What are they thinking now? What do they do now? What do they do now? As opposed to schematic storytelling, where you come up with these preconceived tentpole moments where it's just like, wouldn't it be awesome if this happened down the line, right?
yeah,
And season 5, perfect example, is the M60 in the trunk, right? I
yeah,
often wonder, what would the show have been if they didn't have that tent pole they were
yeah,
building up to? Because they really, like, they locked themselves in with that
yeah,
ending, right at the
hmm,
start of that season, where it's just
yeah,
like, well, we got to pay this off now if we're
yeah,
doing this. But you can understand why Vince did it, because his vision for the show was always to turn him into Scarface, right?
hmm,
So it's like, let's give him a big gun, and then the audience will see it and be like, holy shit, this is cool.
yeah,
Like, I admire the ballsiness of it. But I
yeah,
do wonder, like, if they had just followed the characters purely moment to moment, would the show have been better for it? Would it have approached a more meaningful ending?
hmm,
And maybe things did end up being a little too tidy
yeah,
for Walt. But I look past that in the grand scheme of things, and I see an illustration of the full spectrum of good to evil and then good again in a
yeah,
single man, and I
yeah,
think that is a really valuable portrait to
yeah,
paint, right? Because a, a huge mistake that the show could have easily done is just bring Walt from good to bad, and then he's just bad, and then he dies, and
yeah,
then it's just like, by making him hit the hard wall of like being as bad as possible, and then sort of reeling it back and saying, what was the point of all this, right?
yeah,
And then trying to make something good of what remains of his life.
yeah,
There's something deeply human and honest about that, I think.
yeah,
And ultimately, I'm satisfied with it. Season 5, I think, is the most flawed season, but it's my second favorite season. Season
mm,
2 is my favorite. Season
yeah,
5 is my second favorite. It's so fun to watch,
yeah,
and it feels dangerous, and it's
yeah,
like nauseating at parts
yeah,
to watch, because you feel like it's so like, fuck, anything can happen
yeah,
now. Because he's filled this power vacuum, right?
yeah,
Gus isn't around, the cartel's
hmm,
not around. It's like Walt has free reign, and it's kind of watching like a
yeah,
firecracker go crazy
yeah.
before it like fizzles out into nothing, right? It has that quality to it that I really enjoy.
I want to come back to your thoughts on why the season's flawed because I think that's very interesting. Real quick, I wanted to mention though for the ending, I think in particular the music at the end for me was a little bit too happy. Like that kind of set the tone for me that like, oh, we're supposed to be happy at this ending. And I watched actually someone edited the ending to not include the music but to include the ambient sound of the thing. And they also included the little outro music for The Wire. Have you ever seen The Wire?
Yeah, I watched the first season. It's a bit slow for me, but it's very good. I got to give it
I
a better
really
chance.
recommend.
Yeah.
I I really recommend you finish it. Like it's one of the most incredible shows I've ever seen. But talk about Breaking Bad. He edited it to be more like an ending to a Wire episode, which is usually very quiet before the little outro music plays. And to me, I was like, oh my god, this creates a completely different tone. You're left then as the audience to basically figure out like, wait, is this happy? Is it sad? I don't quite know. And I think that might have been a little bit better. So I think maybe just the music choice was a little bit off. But I agree with you that, like I said, that like it is excuse me, it is really satisfying to see. And it does, I feel like, complete Walt's journey because as evil as he is, I don't think he's like a serial killer where he's like irredeemably evil. He just had these flaws that he allowed to just go way out of control. And because of the events of the end, he was forced to rein it in. He admitted to Skylar that, yes, it was about me, not about the family. He was finally honest when he had been lying the entire series. So I thought that was a really good note to end it on. But taking it
Hmm.
back to season five, I'd really be curious to hear your thoughts about what you thought the flaws were in that season. Not that I disagree, I'd love to hear it though.
God, I wish I put a little bit more thought into
No,
this
no worries.
beforehand. But
It could be just general kind of stuff of like, or maybe to take it back, like what about season two in particular you felt like made it like the strongest season for you?
season 2 felt small and intimate and very moment to moment organic, and the black and white foreshadowing
Yeah,
with the pink bear, I fucking love that stuff, and that juxtaposed with the moment to moment storytelling.
yeah,
Like you mix those two together and it's just great. Like every
yeah,
scene feels tense because you know it's building up to something horrible,
yeah,
and it's not obvious like how you're going to reach that point
yeah,
until the very end. um Season 5, I feel like the show got a little bit big-headed almost. Like some beats felt a little on the nose. Like Jesse James is mentioned
yeah,
one too many times.
yeah,
Like nothing stops this train, and then they end up
yeah,
robbing a train, and then uh just little things like that where like the show was trying to like memeing itself
yeah,
almost a little too much and enjoying the fact that like too much that Walt is at like the top of the dog pile now.
yeah.
And I wish they had just like toned that down a little bit.
Hmm.
um I think that's what I'm getting at when I say flawed. And I might think up some more examples along the way, but that's all I can think of for now. Sorry.
I got you. No, I definitely agree with that. And again, the problems that were pointed out to me about the finale, I think go along with that. Again, Walt's kind of treatment of Gretchen and Elliot also stood out to me as like really self indulgent. Like maybe they were trying to say something with that because like it's clear to me if you watch the show that Gretchen and Elliot did nothing to Walt. It's just a delusion in his head that he was forced out of his company when he fully admits that he left on his own terms. And there's a lot of subtext that like he left Gretchen because she was too rich and he felt inferior, and
Right.
all this kind of stuff like that. And so I felt like the ending where he like just torments them, and is like, if you don't deliver this money, I'm gonna have hitmen, they're gonna follow you the rest of your life, kind of thing. It's like it felt a little bit too much like he was lording over them, when I felt like maybe a moment of like honesty on his part to be like, you guys really didn't screw me. I screwed myself because of my pride and my ego. Just like he talks to Skylar about that. But again, you could maybe argue that he needed that impetus to push him to go back to Albuquerque, because he was
Right.
ready to give up until he saw the Charlie Rose show with them talking about him and saying he didn't contribute anything. So I think maybe from a mechanical standpoint, he needed that motivation, but I agree with you. It felt like they were like almost like believing Walt's bullshit. The writers were at that point.
Right. It's funny. I do like that scene a lot, but I totally agree with you that he's in such a point of decay at that point that maybe he should have been a little more nicer and honest with them. It
Mm,
feels like he was at that point in his character where that would be
yeah,
more appropriate rather than trying to be this like demonic figure almost.
yeah. And it's also like they never even addressed the fact that like when Gretchen calls him, in the first season to offer him money, like say you need to take this money, blah blah blah. On the phone, she's crying, like she's like genuinely cares about Walt, and he again in his like twisted delusions has come to like hate her and hate Elliot when they had no animosity to him at all. So again, I felt like that was a little bit of a sour note for me too. But um, I agree with you. Season two really felt like that's when the show came into its own. Like season one, a little bit rough. Again, they had the story going in a completely different direction, but the writers guild strike forced them to kind of change some things for the better, way for the better. But season two felt like it really started getting into like who is Walt, who is Jesse. That's when we first started to see signs that like Jesse is a better person than we first maybe thought he was. And he basically becomes like a Christ figure by the end with the whole
Yeah.
carpentry thing and stuff. So
And that's often the case with the second seasons of television in
yeah,
general, right? Where it's just like you do the first season, you got that in the can. All of a sudden, with the second season, you got a bunch of cool ideas for where to take
yeah,
the show next. The writers have found their footing with the cast, like they know who they're writing for now, and so they can play to the actors' strengths.
yeah,
and the actors are more familiar and more comfortable with their fellow cast members and everything. Like there's all these ingredients coming
Yeah.
together, and yeah.
In that vein, when do you think Arby and the Chief became Arby and the Chief for you?
Oh, hmm. I don't really draw a line in that regard. I don't think. I think the show. I would always say the show has always been what it is, but it definitely shifted in
Yeah.
format around season 5.
Yeah.
But seasons 1 to 3, I kind of I think of that as all kind of the same sort of thing, like
Gotcha.
self-contained. It may be a little more disciplined as it went on,
Hmm.
but I had a lot to learn about writing. Even
Yeah.
now, doing
Yeah.
season 8, I'm still learning shit. It's a never-ending process.
To me, I always felt like season 4 of Arby and the Chief was when it really became. I see a lot of like the stuff that you carried forward from there. Even though that season it doesn't have like one story it's telling, I felt like the writing became very mature. The cinematography, especially for episodes like Night of the Evading Dead or The Spider, became really like sophisticated. Not just you know whatever. Not to say that the early seasons weren't good, but for me, that's kind of like the definitive point where I see you kind of maturing as an artist.
Yeah, well, something really clicked for me in terms of screenplay writing on the episode Digital Fruitcakes in particular, which
Yeah,
is towards the end of season 4,
yeah,
where all of a sudden I realized, like, oh yeah, you can have character arcs where character
yeah,
goes from state A to state B from the
yeah.
beginning to the end, and then you can bookend episodes where the end sort of reflects
Hmm.
the beginning in some aspect.
Yeah,
And I became hyper aware of that all of a sudden, and I'm just like, I got to do this every time because
yeah,
this is great. It's compelling storytelling, right?
yeah,
And then the spider, I think, is probably my one of my best episodes, if not the
yeah,
best episode I've
yeah,
made. I was really proud of that one. It just everything just came together perfectly for
yeah.
me.
I love that episode. I love Night of the Evading Dead. I think it's so funny and so um again it had that same kind of quality to it, whereas like it had like one kind of central idea of like the zombie element, but how it applied again to like we talked about online interactions, and it all kind of blended together in an incredible way for me. So I love that episode. But
Yeah.
earlier we were talking about how you know at the beginning of season 5 of Breaking Bad, they have that central thing of like the M60 machine gun, and that's the tent pole that the whole season now revolves around. Now, bringing that to your show of season 8, from the very first episode, we get a flash forward of the things to come, and we're about to get the finale, presumably in the near future here. So how did that kind of affect the writing and how you created the show? Because season 8 was told over a very long time. Episodes are very long, which is great, but that kind of stretched out the narrative over a number of years. So how did you stay true to that linchpin you gave yourself at the beginning while still kind of letting the story flow organically?
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time thinking about that flash forward, about whether this is the right thing to do or not. I was obviously inspired by season 5 of Breaking Bad and what it did with its flash forward. But I thought carefully about doing that before I did it, and I decided the toys being at their own funeral to do something reprehensible. I I felt like I didn't want to do the story any other way. So I was always confident, like I could build up to this moment and it's going to be cool when I do. And I'm not going to want to deviate off this path because anything else feels inferior. So I did put a lot of thought into it beforehand. And the whole thing, like 5, 6 years ago, the whole season was planned out in broad strokes, not the minute detail of it, not like the dialogue specifically, but in broad strokes, I knew like this is going to lead to this, it's going to lead to this. And I think that's okay as long as you mix that appropriately with organic storytelling where it all feels organic. Like I would comb through it backwards and forwards, making sure like, does will people buy this? Like, because there's an interesting argument here to be had about like art versus propaganda, right? Where like, are you trying to force an outcome that's unnatural, right? That's not true to the characters, and I feel like you can take a mix of both approaches to create something that feels organic, but does have those tentpole moments to make it exciting, right? Because I think if you try and do purely the organic approach, the idea that you're going to stick the landing at the very end thematically and make something, come up with something truly satisfying, is, the chances of that are so slim that I think you have to throw an ingredient in there where it's just like you have to have some idea of what you're building up to at least, you know. And so you have to be careful and just, so I would just go through it forwards and backwards, literally, uh scene by scene, going, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Do I need to add a scene here to make this make sense? Maybe I don't need this scene, I can take this out. And it's just months and months of agonizing over that until like I can go through it forward and be like, okay, people will buy this. I'm not shoveling the audience unbelievable shit. Like, they'll be okay with this and I'm okay with this. And yeah.
That makes sense. And again, I think that I really enjoy the way each season has ramped up the tension in a very believable and organic way for me. Whereas like season 5 with the wedding thing had high stakes, even though there wasn't the frag ban or any of this other kind of stuff yet. Um, Again, the whole consequence was just that, is Claire going to go through with this, thing that, even if he told her afterwards and they got a divorce, that's still a very like traumatizing thing to go through that.
High emotional stakes, right? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then again, season 6 is when we start to get into some more lasting consequences. It's just bans at that point. Season 7, it becomes still bans, but again, a very like dark and sinister thing. Like doing it just for like the pleasure of destroying something is dark in a way that Chaos Theosis wasn't. And then season 7 or 8, you ratchet up even further. So I really enjoyed that progression, and that also to me mirrors a lot of again like shows like Breaking Bad, other shows too, where at the beginning the stakes are not necessarily that high. Like, yeah, Walter could die in the first season or whatever. There was that threat there, but as it became more and more it went on, it was like, oh, not only is there the threat of death, there's the threat of like irrevocable emotional damage from what he's doing to his family, what people are doing to each other. Same thing with The Sopranos too. It became more and more like bleak because of that. So I recognize that kind of pattern as well.
Yeah. And I always admired about Breaking Bad how it would have these explosive kind of moments that you would see in a blockbuster movie type thing, but it would also, most of its scenes are well researched, like full of minute details, sort of scenes where like where they're having, discussions with their doctors or whatever, or like therapists, or like it's well researched. The doctors say things that they actually would say. And like, because you're mixing that with also sometimes with scenes where cars explode and cartel guys get murdered or murder people, uh when you mix those two together, all of a sudden every single scene feels tense and it's fun to write, you know. Like for me, it's like I always tried to make the show fun to write for me, so I would always be enthusiastic. Like, as soon as I was writing and I felt like this is boring, I'm like, I'm making a mistake here, something's not right, and I got to go back to the drawing board and figure out what's the problem here, like, why is this not fun? Every scene should be fun for me to write. I always kept that in mind. Yeah.
I think so too. And I also think there's a big difference between like boring and quiet, because like there were people who were criticizing Breaking Bad for like, oh, there's scenes where they just eat breakfast, or there's scenes where it's like, again, a shot of the sky or something like that where nothing's happening, and they're like, why is this? But those moments add to the tension, they add to the pacing and the atmosphere, where it's like, if it was all just action and like stuff happening, you would get numb to it just because it's just constantly coming. You become desensitized. But I think those slow, quiet moments really add to the atmosphere of the show and create almost like a visual like style of storytelling, and I think the same thing was true of Arby and the Chief. Like, I know people criticize like season 5 and onward where it was like, oh, there's stuff that's happening here where it's like it's not funny, or they're not playing video games or making memes or something. But again, those moments I think contribute to the larger kind of emotional story that you're telling about these characters.
Yeah, and there's like in Arby and the Chief and Breaking Bad as well, like even the scenes that seem boring and pointless, there's never a pointless scene. I always was very careful with that. Like analyzing every scene in like my overall outline. I'd be like, why is this scene here? There needs to be a reason, even if it's like very unobvious. Like if it's a subtle thing that's symbolic of something. And Breaking Bad is full of symbolism, like like to a remarkable degree for a show that's so like regular and domestic and recognizable. It finds so many moments to like illustrate something poetic and profound in some simple visual. Like, you know, when Hank finds out who what Walt really is, and he's like looking at him outside through the curtain, and like he pulls the curtain away, like he's unveiled for the first time, right? He opens it, Marie's calling him the devil. Like there's a quick little line there. Like it finds moments like that all the time that are that there's a brief little moment that paints something much more broad and profound about life and existence and the human condition and all that. I was always very attentive to that. Yeah.
Yeah, Vince Gilligan especially, or maybe not just him. I shouldn't attribute all of it to him. I mean, there were a number of people who directed those episodes. That one in particular, Bryan Cranston directed that episode. But there was so much, again, like attention to little details like that, to the cinematography, that elevated the show in my mind above just television. You know, it's not the first show to ever be more like a movie, but I I very rarely see a show that has such a consistent, again, visual style to it, the way it's telling it, all those details. They never felt out of place where it's like, oh, this is the really kind of artsy fartsy moment. Even from the beginning, it was the way it was telling a story was very much like that. And I think it's, again, obviously we've been singing the praises this entire episode. It's just one of the most incredible pieces of television ever. Have you kept up to date with, I mean, Better Call Saul, and have you finished that show?
Yep. I love it.
What were your thoughts on that? Because, you know, coming from Breaking Bad, right? You have this incredible bar to hit, right? Where it's like this is considered to be one of, if not the greatest shows ever. And now you're gonna follow it up and also include many of the same characters. So, you know, there were high expectations for this. What were your thoughts on that show?
Are you expecting your viewers of this podcast to be familiar with the ending of Better Call Saul? Like, can we describe?
I always tell people, I put a little thing at the beginning that says spoilers ahead. So spoilers for Better Call Saul, if you have not seen it. But if you have not seen it, what are you doing with your life? Come on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, um, I suspect that obviously the writers put a tremendous amount of thought into how to end that show and what would be the most satisfying ending for Saul. And David Chase himself said in regard to The Sopranos, when you're writing stories about people with criminal lives, there's only three endings, right? Well, two, maybe three: dead, jail, or in hiding. And so, dead, do we want Saul to die? Does he deserve that? Walt already died in Breaking Bad, so do we want to repeat the same beat again? Essentially, in hiding, he's already been in hiding for a while, so jail seems to be the way to go. And I think they thought of that ending in broad terms first of all, and then they decided, okay, jail. What are the details of that? How do we build up to that in the most satisfying way possible? And I think that was the way to go. And I really liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't understand people's problem with the ending. People are calling Saul a simp because he took the years for Kim. But
Mm,
I don't think that's at all the message. Like, again, obviously that would not be the message, but even like, again, on any kind of level, that's not the message. I felt like him taking those years was him finally being honest with who he is, just like with Walt. The ending had him finally admitting who he was. Saul had the same thing. There's this kind of idea in Catholicism and other religions too that, like, in order to be forgiven, you have to fully confess your sins and admit everything. You can't hide anything. So for him to have gotten those like minimum years he was going to get originally, he would still be Saul. But by the end, he was Jimmy again. He had admitted who he was. It had nothing to do with Kim. Although there is an interesting parallel that when he and Walt are in the disappearer's basement waiting, he tells Walt, like, don't run, like, turn yourself in, which is exactly what he ends up doing too. So I like that there's like that kind of synchronicity between the endings there too.
yep.
Um, but I thought the ending was fantastic. I will say that I felt a lot of season 6 was poorly paced, and I think the focus was not where it should have been. I feel like the show gave too much attention to like Lalo and the cartel storyline and not enough to Jimmy and Kim's relationship, which is the central thing of the show to me in my mind.
Right.
But in regards to the ending, I thought it was a powerful one. Even though it was kind of memey, I love the whole like Better Call Saul. It's you. It's Better Call Saul.
Right.
I love
He's
that
kind
meme.
he's a he's in jail, but he's lauded as a hero by
Yeah,
his fellow inmates, and he at least knows he's no one is in the prison is out to hurt him, because
yeah.
they all see him as kind of this heroic figure that got a
Mhm.
lot of them probably out of jail time maybe at some point, but then they eventually went to jail anyway. But
Yeah,
they appreciate what he does. You know,
yeah,
he helps the little guy.
hmm
There's something admirable about that, as criminal as it is.
yeah.
There was always some good to him.
And again, there's a really hopeful message that like maybe he and Kim will be reunited some way. They share that cigarette together. I don't think it's like goodbye forever. Um, I think a lot of people were salty that like we had a scene with her with another guy because they're like, but she's my waifu, you know, like kind of thing. But yeah, no, I thought the ending was really powerful. Again, I wish, to me it was a little like disheartening the way they break up and then we immediately cut to the future. Like I was like, you're not even going to give a little bit of time to explore like the immediate ramifications of that. But I some of that I think was also COVID. Like they couldn't all be together at the same time, kind of thing. So they had to like reformat it a little bit. But um,
I never
Breaking
thought
Bad
of
had
that.
the yeah, Breaking
That's
Bad
a
had
good
the same
point.
thing with the Writers Guild strike. So you have to sometimes just adapt to real life changing circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, and that threw a lot of productions off. It's a shame, but yeah, that time jump felt a little jarring to me as well. I wasn't sure how to feel about it right away. I think I'm okay with it, but like I would have been interested to see one or two scenes in between those that in that time jump. Yeah,
It was also interesting that they never gave us like when I first saw the show, I was like, oh, we're gonna see Saul in his office doing like Saul kind of stuff before he meets Walt, like getting people off, all this kind of stuff. But we really don't get that ever. Like it, he's already we basically skip over that timeline and we explore both ends of it. But again, I think it became like this really interesting character study of a man who went bad in the same way that Walt did, but just for different reasons. You know, his whole thing was like turning off his emotions, turning off like any kind of sense of responsibility so that he could fully embrace this like scumbag persona that he had invented. But um I I think there were always hints in Breaking Bad that like at his core he's a good person. You know, it always seemed like he was like kind of anxious about Walt doing like the really awful stuff. Like he didn't want to necessarily be a part of that. You know.
yeah. I think similar to other characters like Jesse, for instance, where like the writers have an idea for this character on the page in their head, but then the cast member comes in and kind of brings the character to life, and then they realize all of a sudden the potential that this character has once the person's fully realized. Like Bob Odenkirk was a genius casting choice for that character, for a character that was essentially just planned to be to serve a plot function, to bring them to the upper levels of like meth distribution, but also a comedic relief character. But Bob Odenkirk just married the two together perfectly and brought so much more to it that made Vince go like, "Oh, there's something really satisfyingly complex about this character, and he's worth exploring." You know, and it's a great decision to do that spin-off show, man. I love Better Call Saul.
I love that scene with them with Walt and Saul together in the basement again, but on Better Call Saul.
Yep.
Because we're so used to seeing Saul as like a supporting character, right? He's always there to help Walt and Jesse, but now we're on the other end of it where Walt is now the supporting character in this scene, and he's like you see Walt in a different light, right? Because he's the protagonist of Breaking Bad. We're always in his head. To see him from Saul's point of view as this really cold, this really arrogant person that's like just unpleasant to be around. And that line he says to him where it's like, so you were always like this, like with just disgust on his face. You could see that all like he had been insulting Saul basically the entire Breaking Bad, but you never saw it like hurt Saul because
Mm.
he had this persona, but in that moment you really see that like, oh, Saul had opened himself up to Walt, and Walt just like slapped him down in that scene, and it makes him feel like this like abused puppy almost. That again, I love that kind of narrative like flip on its head.
Yeah, and almost a weird funhouse reflection of Walt, of like, because Saul, despite being a comedic relief character, is an incredibly smart guy, and he knows how the world works. He knows how to grease the wheels. He knows how to manipulate people. Um, and what else was I going to say? I can't remember, but he's just yeah, like I don't know, but
He's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
He's
just a
awesome.
terrific character. Yeah.
Again, I think that again that range of emotion that he can bring to it is what made this character not just one note. Like even in Breaking Bad, I
Mhm.
think we can see some of that there, but really in this show that like, oh, the underdog persona, the scumbag persona, he brought it all to the table in a really believable way. And I think all the characters, the supporting characters on our show, Chuck, one of my favorite characters of all time, like the he's so hateable, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I see you're in pain too. Like that scene with them and their
Mm.
mother where she's dying and she's calling out for Jimmy, not him. And you're like, you can see the hate boiling under the surface. He reminds me a lot of Walt. That the hate
Mhm.
was like boiling under the surface and it just came spewing out and he became this kind of villain by the end. But again, Michael McKean was just so incredible in that role.
Yeah, totally. And regarding Saul, quite happy to take shortcuts, much like Walt. That was the other thing I wanted to, the other thing I was thinking of, but I couldn't remember. Um, and having that like moral kind of blind spot, where it's just like, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, I need to get what I want. It'll be better for everyone if this happens. I'll just take this shortcut and it'll be fine.
And you can see too that
Yeah.
it's also not even just that too, but it's also oftentimes a reaction to when he feels inferior. It's a way to make himself feel more powerful, that when he's breaking the rules kind of stuff, because he goes through the beginning, before we start the series, as a straight arrow, like just trudging along, but when encountered stuff with like Kim or his brother, it pushes him to like, oh, I'm going to embrace the Saul Goodman persona because now I feel in control. I don't feel weak. Just like that criminal who came into the store when he was a kid and told him like, there's wolves and there's sheep in this world. Which one are you going to be? So again, I love
Right.
that they made that like, again, a very like emotional thing rather than just being like a vice of his.
Yeah. Very well realized character.
Yeah.
And like, when you cast comedians in dramatic roles like that, they're very good at like
Oh yeah.
making characters that do despicable things likable at the same time,
Yeah.
you know.
I really love that cast again, like you said, casting comedians. I first noticed it in Rain Over Me, the Adam Sandler movie. Before that, I thought Adam Sandler was just like a one note comedian kind of guy, but I was like, oh, you have range here. He's actually a Juilliard trained actor too, which is so funny to hear. And I've
Mhm.
noticed that with some other performances as well, that like, oh, comedians can really bring, because they have to like study humanity, they can really
Yes.
bring some just incredible performances, and I'm glad to see more and more comedians get cast in serious stuff.
I think there's something about like the good comedians, they understand the role that grief plays in making material that's
Yeah,
really funny. And then obviously when you cast them in a dramatic role, they can take full advantage of that
yeah,
understanding of grief and implement it in a way that they can't quite do on stage. Like Bryan Cranston isn't known for stand-up comedy, but that guy is an entertainer to the
oh
bone.
yeah,
Like, if you, any interview material, behind the scenes stuff you watch, he's always trying to entertain everyone around him, make people laugh, and he plays that role of Walter White with a veiled comedy all the
yeah.
way through, I think. And it's funny, it's not obvious to everyone. I had a discussion with somebody about this earlier. Like, we were talking about um, Bryan Cranston possibly playing the role of Lex Luthor,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and I had said, yeah, if they did cast him, I imagine he'd play it in a Gene Hackman sort of way, from
Mm.
like the '80s, where
Yeah, yeah,
it's like there's a veiled comedy to that as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
like Gene sort of, he's just this angry barking character,
Yeah.
but there's something funny about all of his delivery, especially
Oh
with his
yeah.
banter with Kitty.
Oh
I'm sure you're
yeah.
familiar with Superman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the person I was talking to was like surprised, but like, really, you think Bryan Cranston would play that Lex Luthor like funny? And I'm like, well, not in an overtly funny
Yeah.
way, but the way he plays Walter White, I can tell at least, like
Oh yeah.
he's constantly looking for moments to like bring comedy to the surface just a little
Yeah.
bit. Like when him and Jesse are in like the house with Tuco and uh, what's his name? Mark Margolis's character.
Oh, a Tio
Um,
uncle though.
yeah,
Yeah.
Tio, right, Uncle Tio, and like there's Jesse saying they should bum rush him, and he
Yeah.
picks up the fly swatter. Like he's just always looking for little beats like that, where it's like that is funny, but he's playing it in a straight way. It's like comedy in a way that doesn't undermine the tension of what's actually going on. Sopranos is really good at that as well.
Oh, the exact
Comedy
same way too.
that doesn't destroy the integrity or the tension of like or the seriousness of
Yeah.
the situation.
Well, I mean, Bryan Cranston, before he was known for Breaking Bad, he was known for Malcolm in the Middle, where he was played the goofy dad. So
And
again,
he did it
definitely that
perfectly.
comedic background that contributed to just an incredible performance there.
Hmm.
I know we're coming close to our hour here, so I'd love to ask you like, what can we expect? Maybe of Arby and the Chief coming up here. I know, and not spoilers or anything, but like, what can we expect of this series and the questions you want to answer, and what can we expect from you moving forward? Because I know you have some other projects as well, like Media Abyss, which I really enjoyed the first episode that came out of that. I can't wait for more of those. So, what does the future look like for John Graham?
Um, this is definitely the last story season, at least
Mm.
that I have planned. I never
Yeah,
want to say never because I've
yeah,
rebooted the show like 3 times already, and it's
yeah.
like if I say never again and then I start it up again because
They're
I get
like,
a new
okay, come
idea,
on.
then I'm gonna look stupid.
Yeah,
So I'm just for now. I feel like this is. I feel like right now I can't go any deeper than I have gone with this
yeah,
latest season in terms of an exploration of good and evil.
yeah,
And this last episode I've got coming up, people are expecting an explosive finale and they're going to get it, but I think a lot of people aren't prepared for how fucking hard this episode goes. I'm going all out for this,
yeah.
and we'll see what people think of it. I think it's bold. It's some devastating stuff, some ridiculous stuff, some comedy, and it's like much like Breaking Bad, where it walks this very fine line between comedy and tragedy
Mm,
very carefully. I
yeah.
try and that's something that inspired me, and I try and always do the same thing with Arby and the Chief. Like, how can I make this funny while preserving the tension and the stakes and everything, and not trivializing anything that shouldn't be trivialized? Like, I think some crazy shit happens at the end of this, and we'll see what people think. I feel pretty good about it. It's all coming together, I think. And other than that, once season 8 is done, I still want to do like I have this sort of sub series called Bites, which is just
Hmm.
like smaller, self
Yeah,
contained, joke focused stuff. I'm
yeah,
gonna go back to that
yeah,
because I feel like I did my storytelling thing with the
yeah,
seasons. I feel like I got it out of my system,
yeah,
but I've still got like funny ideas.
yeah,
So I'm quite happy to keep doing those whenever I get an idea for it. I don't want to lock myself into
yeah,
like having to do a whole season of stuff. I'll
mm,
just put out singular episodes whenever I
yeah,
get ideas for them. And Media Abyss is my new review show where I talk about just whatever I find interesting that's media related. Might be something I love, might be something I hate, could be video games, could be
yeah,
movies, but just if I have something to say about it,
yeah,
I'll make an episode about it. I'm not restricted in terms of like how
yeah,
long the episodes have to be. It's
yeah,
just I put a lot of thought into that. I'm just like I don't want to be locked into any particular method of like doing this show. I just want to
yeah.
liberate myself as much as possible with it. So there's that, and I'm gonna do some like sketch comedy as well. I got ideas for that. I'm gonna
Nice.
take advantage of YouTube's shorts
Oh,
format. I
nice.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, 'cause apparently you get a buttload of views if you do shorts these days. So I'm gonna experiment with that, see what
The
happens.
TikTok crowd.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not keen on TikTok. I don't want to do that, but
Hmm.
I'll take advantage of YouTube Shorts and see how that goes.
I got you. I'm excited, man. I really am. Like, um, I For those of you who don't know, I actually got to be on an episode of Arby and the Chief. The last one, I played one of the villain's goons, which was awesome, and um, that might be honestly the highlight of my YouTube career so far, because I have been following this show since I was like a little kid. Like, no lie, like I really really like it. Again, I'm someone who obsesses over like shows like Sopranos and Breaking Bad, and that shit might have started for me with Arby and the Chief because it was a show that had depth, and I was like, oh, this isn't just something you can watch once and just be like, you got everything. It's like you have to like actually pay attention and put some thought into why these actions are happening, and you're rewarded for it by getting this awesome like discovery of like themes and characters and all this kind of stuff. So um, to actually be a part of that was an incredible honor, and thank you so much for having me on there. That was so cool.
Oh, no problem. I'm quite happy to have you on there. And it's an uncredited role in that episode, by the way, because I fucked up. And I'm very sorry about that. That was my bad. But I am going to put you in the credits for the finale. I just had a
Awesome,
million things to like keep in mind, and it was a render, like I forgot to just include it. I fucked up.
dude.
But
No worries.
anyway, you'll be in the credits in the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. And honestly, that kind of made it cool because I was watching it in bed next to my woman, and uh, I I hear that voice, and I was like, "Wait, what? What is that?" And it's like, "Wait, that's me." And she's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like, I'm in the video. She's like, "You are?" And I was like, "Yeah." I didn't know that it was. So it was this incredible surprise to me that I would if you talk to her, she'll be like, "Yeah, he was like screaming and shit. That he was like a little girl or something on Christmas." So that was an awesome experience. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to more bites and more other stuff like that too, because even the comedy focused bites I thought had this kind of narrative structure to them, like the Christmas episode that takes place at your mother's house might be one of my favorite episodes of that you've done, like the that warm kind of feeling that you have at the end of it with like the toys coming together, like Merry Christmas, like I
Oh
just get
yeah.
happy whenever I think about that episode.
Thank you, man. Like no matter what the episode is, whether it's just like a stupid one-off thing, I take the three-act structure really seriously, and I
Yeah.
follow the same template every time. And I'm just
Hmm.
like, what's the crisis? How does everything come together in the end? Like I'm very careful with that because I know that's just it's satisfying, reliable storytelling.
Yeah.
It's not
That
just
makes
limited to the seasons of
no.
like the mainline episodes. Like I take every episode seriously structurally in terms of
Yeah.
structure.
No, your work taught me that like short internet comedy can be kind of more than just dumb shit that you just record with your phone or whatever. There could be like an art to it that elevates it. That yeah, it's still silly and it's still goofy or whatever, but there's some intentionality behind it, and I'm gonna start to do more kind of like maybe live action sketch comedy stuff too. And I think your work is a big inspiration for that. So the future is bright for both of our channels. They can expect a lot of great stuff moving forward.
Thank you, and I hope you do that because you're damn good at it, really.
Thank you.
And
Thank you guys.
what was I going to say? There was one other thing.
Yeah.
The Oh god, my brain sucks. I had it and then it's gone now.
It's all that
Um,
dank weed you've been smoking. It's rotted your brain.
yeah, and whatever. It probably wasn't that important anyway. I really appreciate you having me on. That was a great discussion. I'm always
No
happy to
worries.
talk to you
I
about
I
whatever.
again, I'm not sure exactly when this is going to come out. It might come out maybe early November. So if you're watching this, some stuff might have come out already that you're like we're talking about in like the future tense here. But as of recording this right now, it's like the middle of October. So we'll have to see. But I hope you all enjoyed this episode. It was always incredible for me to talk to John. And stay tuned for both of our channels for a bunch of amazing content to come. So talk to y'all later.
Take care, guys.